Hello, welcome to the Josh Volinski Show. And it's very good to be with you today. Hey, that's a delicious meal you're cooking, Miss Schwartz. I wish I was in your living room sharing your food with you. Well, today we have a unique guest. We have Diane Montford, a transgendered activist. Diana, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Diane Montford, and you're not. Hello, hello.
Diana,
Yes.
what is a transgendered activist?
Well, a transgendered person is one who was born in one gender and transitions to another. And that is what I have done. An activist is one who brings attention to a particular cause. Ergo, transgender activists, put them all together, shake well, this is what you get.
Ah,
Uh-huh.
and what age did you decide to, come out?
Well, really all my life, I never had the luxury of being in the closet. I never had the luxury of male privilege because I was always, exceedingly effeminate, and I was a girl anyway. So I transitioned at the age of 15 with my parents' blessing and, one might say, encouragement.
Wow.
Mm.
And tell us, how did your uh, parents handle it? I mean, they, in an earlier conversation you told me they took it very naturally
Oh,
and
yes.
beautifully.
Yep, absolutely. Well, they were happy for me that I had, in effect, found myself, that I was at peace and not, oddly enough, I was no longer the neighborhood freak. Once I transitioned, everyone took it, well, finally, okay, good. I mean, everyone, it was very strange. And also, when I was 15, my mother sadly died of cancer, and I was sent to school in Spain, in Madrid. And that is where I basically transitioned in Madrid, Spain. My mother was from Spain and my father was American. So I had ties to Spain, and that's where I did my, uh, that's where I ironed out the bugs, so to speak. So there you go.
Well, I think I shared with you the fact that I've learned two things in life.
Only two?
Uh, I mean, this October I'm going to be 76 years
Hey, you
old,
look great.
and I want to say I learned two things. The most precious thing you can have in life, besides being happy,
Yeah,
is to have somebody in your corner.
I
It's
agree.
totally irrelevant who that person is, whether it's a father, mother, sister, brother, another
Friend.
woman, another man,
Sure.
or someone of the opposite sex. If you really have someone in your corner who's a friend, who shares the trials and tribulations of your life, who you can come to when you're in trouble and you need help, you have something precious. And the second thing is to be happy. And to be happy, you have to really, you know,
Get
be
laid a
happy
lot.
with your
Yeah,
body and yourself and your very essence and existence,
I agree.
right?
Yes, yes, yes. Totally, 1000%. I think contentment is more reachable than happiness. Happiness to me implies euphoria, whereas contentment seems to be something that everyone can reach within herself or himself. It's not what you have, it's not what you want, it's simply a sense of being at peace within oneself, I think.
Yes. And,
But then don't go by me, I'm not Socrates.
and also,
Oh,
we discussed some transgendered personalities, and I know there are others,
yeah.
but like I know Andrea
I
Sears.
love Andrea. Yes, she is. God damn, that
Where
light
did
is
you
bright
meet
on me.
Andrea?
Oh, I met Andrea many years ago. We were activists together. We went to Albany for a political event. We have known each other for many, many years now, and she's great, and she's a very strong, brave, brilliant lady, and I like her a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Andrea also has a son under her previous
Yeah.
experience
Yeah.
and present experience,
Yeah.
and very, very interesting. And then, of course, I mentioned a person who I never met, but I read about, but you met her, Sylvia Rivera.
Wonderful. And
Tell us
yeah.
a little about Sylvia Rivera.
Sylvia Rivera, it was my pleasure and privilege to know Ms. Sylvia Rivera, who was a lady of transgender experience, who died sadly at the age of 50 of liver cancer, but who in those 50 years did a great deal. She was at the Stonewall Rebellion in 1969. She was a tireless, truly tireless activist for transgender rights, for LGBT rights in general. She was courage personified. She was uh, not well educated, but an exceedingly intelligent person. Very much nature's noble woman. She was uh, bravery personified. She just really is, to my way of thinking, one of the main architects of the current LGBT rights movement. She was brilliant, and I don't think that we would have come as far as we have come so far without Sylvia Rivera's input and guidance and sense of outrage at the abridgment of our supposedly inalienable rights. So Sylvia Rivera was a great lady. I'm, as I've said, privileged to have known her. She was also a very nice person, a very kind person. Certainly a lady who had every kind of life experience one can have, and used her unfortunate life as a kind of gauge for you know, she was a very empathic person, let's put it that way, and she did a great deal for people behind the scenes. And for example, Metropolitan Community Church, the LGBT church here in New York, well, and all over the world, but here in New York they have the Sylvia Rivera Food Pantry. They feed those who cannot afford to feed themselves. There's the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, named after the great Sylvia, obviously. And they do transgender law, LGBT law. They do a great many good things. And Sylvia was a unique person, and I believe that the earth is blessed to have had her. She was a lovely lady, and I considered her one of my most precious friends, actually.
Yes, yes. I read about Sylvia. At one point, well, she suffered under child abuse,
Yes.
and at
so,
another
yes.
point, she was a sex worker,
Yes.
who certainly is an underrated profession if you really, if you really consider all the needs of humanity and so on.
Well,
That's certainly an underpaid and badly treated profession that has been with us since we were on the face of the earth. Now you do, Diana, you do a wonderful program here on M&N,
well,
and I'm going to
thank
be
you.
a guest on it
Yes,
at the
you
end
are.
of the month.
Yes, you are.
Would you tell us about your program?
Sure.
What do you call it, and what topics do you cover?
Well, it's called the Diane Montford Show. It's been on the air since 1990. It is a program, basically a public affairs program. Yes, we do dwell on LGBT causes naturally, but we cover a broad range of topics. We are not, strictly speaking, LGBT or trans-centric, but it helps, right? But since there are so few programs dealing with transgender issues, in fact, frankly, mine's the only one I know of, it's important to get those issues out there, especially now with the internet. The Diane Montford Show is seen all over the world, I'm happy to say.
Wow.
And yes, and we get feedback from all over the world. Wherever there's internet access, there is the Diane Montford Show, should you wish to see it. And while we here in Manhattan are used to persons of transgender experience in other nations, that isn't the case, and those who are transgender or wish to become transgender have precious few role models and examples in their day-to-day lives, so they like to watch, yes, my show, the Diane Montford Show, to see trans folk unfolding in a successful way, having a life, having freedom, having a sense of self, not being afraid, not being made to feel as though they were less than others. And while here in New York we have laws, I know because I helped get the law passed, transgender inclusion here in, New York City, that obviously is not the case in other nations where, some people think that they are better than others and feel that, the earth belongs to them and that anyone out of the norm, for example, transgender folk, are somehow not quite as human as they are. So I like to think that my show helps people in other nations and here naturally to feel comfortable with their transgender leanings and to give them courage to go forward and live the transgender experience. And no one does not have to be a sex worker to be transgendered. Sylvia Rivera sadly had to be, but she was, as I've said, a lady of extremely, excuse me,
that's okay. That's
limited formal education, and there was a certain class prejudice against her because she was, in a kind of member of what our nation insists on making a kind of permanent underclass, whereas many transgender people, I mean, it is the entire socioeconomic spectrum. You can't say that, well, transgendered people are underclass sex workers. There are many who are, and that's fine. But there are many who are upper middle class, upper class, middle class, every class. They do every kind of work. They, I mean, you don't lose IQ points when you become transgender. You are just as human and intelligent as those who live the gender they were born into. And really, what is gender? Gender is a social construct, so there's no such thing as living one's gender. There's simply living one's gender according to the rules of one's time and place. Gender is, it's a complete illusion. It is an invention. I mean, gender is really what's your genitals. Anything else is just, a kind of social invention and convention. So.
Yes, I hear everything you're saying. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask you one other question that's a little hard. But while you're clearing your truth, you mentioned your mother was from Spain.
Yes.
And your father was Scottish, Irish.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate people from Europe. As a bookseller on the weekends, I supplement my income by selling books both in person and on the internet, and in person at the bookstand in front of, say, bars. I always value my European customers. They are so more down to earth. One day I was selling an erotic book.
Ooh, what was it?
It was an erotic book by the famous film producer of the 20th century, Harold Lloyd.
Oh,
he was a silent film
I remember. Yes,
producer
I know.
and actor and comedian.
Yes.
And he took thousands of photographs of every type. He was a photographer. But one of the photographs he did was he did many women in a nude. And he put them in 3 dimensions.
Wow.
Many, many years ago in the 30s and 40s in 3 dimensions. So I was selling that book. So many American men came by, local men, West Side men. They said, I would buy that book, but my wife would object. And another man said, I love that book, but my wife would throw me out of the house. And then along comes an Italian woman with her husband and 2 children. And she buys the book right in their present. And she looks at her husband and she says, Frankie, this book is for you. And her 2 children were with her, and the attitude in Europe is so different from the
Sure. Well, we're a
kind of,
puritanical nation.
yeah, puritanical attitude they have here. Like it's a difference between day and night. I know I was in a cafe and some European asked me, "What, I don't understand this. What did Spitzer do wrong?"
He kept
talking
his
about
socks on.
he couldn't
That's
figure
what he
out.
did wrong.
He said our people in France, have mistresses. They go to the opera with their mistresses.
Excuse me, my grandfather was a politician in Spain 100 years ago. He had mistresses. My grandmother, his wife, knew it. She looked the other way. That is a way of life in Europe. Whereas here, they have mistresses anyway, and the women have lovers, but oh my God, if someone finds out, and that's ridiculous. That is not nature. That is not human. That is not. I don't know if monogamy is even possible. I don't know if it's desirable. I wonder why in this country they insist on the impossible. I mean, human beings, to my way of thinking, were not made to be monogamous. They were made to be perhaps emotionally monogamous, to love, but I think that physically, well, the grass is always greener, over the septic tank. And everybody wants to, that was an odd Freudian way to put it, and everyone wants to try everyone else. And I don't see anything wrong with that,
Okay, here's the tough question
But
I
then I'm a
want
dirty old
to
broad.
ask you, Diana.
What?
This is the more difficult. What obstacles do transgendered people still have to bridge and overcome in this dysfunctional society?
Well, for one thing, that people don't understand, that they think that if you're transgendered, you are somehow less than human. Another thing is, as I mentioned earlier, there is a law in New York City preventing discrimination against trans folk. Even the police often don't know of the law, and if they do know of the law, they will not enforce it. And that's a huge problem, and we do sensitivity training at various precincts, but it seems to go in one ear and out the other, or it goes in one ear and out their orifices because they just don't get it. And basically a transgendered person is a person. That's it. A transgendered person is a person. And there is no difference between those who are transgendered and those who are not. It's simply a case of the packaging. But inside, transgendered folk are just like anyone else. Many transgendered people are forced to live a life underground or outside the law because, of course, in our society, no one will give them jobs, no one will, respect them. And so that's why you have some transgendered people becoming sex workers or narcotics peddlers or any number of things that are illegal, because no one will give them a job as, say, a receptionist or as anything, as a lawyer, as a doctor, as a this, as a that. And that's not right, and I mean, once people realize that transgendered people are people, and that's it, they're just as human as anyone else, then I think the world will be a better place. And I think diversity is always good. You need a huge mix of people to make the world interesting and to provide different ideas. The more diversity, the better everything works, because each person comes from a different experience and has a different idea. Mix all those ideas together and you have not necessarily a utopia, but certainly something better for more people than you would otherwise have, I think.
Yeah, Diana, I want to ask you, what impact does the exhibitionist transgendered person have on the entire
well, what do you mean by
group?
exhibitionist?
Well, very few people are really exhibitionists in any category. So, you see the exhibitionist, transgendered person in maybe the gay parade, or sometimes
Well,
on some
yes,
rare
and
programs.
that is
But
their
that's
right.
very rare. What impact does that group have on everybody?
I think that's a value judgment, and I don't think that that applies. I think that the so-called exhibitionistic transgendered folk have a right to be exhibitionistic transgendered folk, just as people have a right to do public access, to do whatever it is they do. And I don't think that really it's anyone's role to judge what is exhibitionistic and what is not. I mean, ultimately, you know, each person belongs to herself or himself and makes one's own judgments, it would seem to me. So I think that those who want to be bourgeois should be bourgeois, and those who want to be exhibitionistic should be exhibitionistic, and those who want to be somewhere in between should be somewhere in between. To thine own self be true.
Yes, I read in today's Times, Barnes & Noble is having financial problems, and the Barnes & Noble that's near us at Lincoln Center, in today's Times it was reported, is going to close in January. Now, I think it's true we can get a lot of information on the internet, but believe it or not, this morning, before I had my interview with you, I went into the Barnes & Noble on 82nd Street and Broadway, and I explored the Barnes & Noble gay section and lesbian section and transgendered section. And there were so many books in there about transgendered people, gay people, lesbians. And I think that if we do not come to the rescue of books that we can open up and look into, we are really robbing ourselves of a great experience.
Well,
so I want to ask our viewers to please be sure, watch your computer, like Diana and I are digital people, but we also look and read books and examine books. And there is an experience that books gives us that no other media gives us. Isn't that correct,
I agree.
Diana?
And you know, George Orwell in the novel 1984 said that, in effect, their computers, they would rework old news and old novels, change them to the zeitgeist of that moment, and basically history was lost because they would simply change things to suit whoever was in political power at that time. So I think books, concrete books that you can hold that are unchanging, are extremely important. Although, on the other hand, Barnes & Noble and other book chains are responsible for the demise of small private bookshops, so what goes around comes around. And I mean, since they, with their capitalistic brio, destroyed so many small bookshops, well, you know, now they're being destroyed by the internet. That's life, folks.
Yeah, that's true. Even though, I tell you, I've worked for Barnes & Noble for 12 years.
Oh, you worked there?
After, well, in the college division, because one institution that went down the tube was the institutional bookstore. I think the only one that has...
On 12th and 5th, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So I was at City College Store for 35 years, and the institutional bookstore became Barnes & Noble. Now, Barnes & Noble is somewhere in between. It's really a family corporation. It doesn't really approve of unions or anything, but it's still a lot better than many other bookstores, even though it does carry its baggage, and it is the cause of driving a lot of small independent stores out of business.
To my way of thinking, excuse me, if they are not in favor of unions, they don't exist as far as I'm concerned. Unions forever. It is the only strength of the working class, and we have to preserve and strengthen unions.
Absolutely,
Hello.
absolutely, absolutely. Another question I want to ask you about,
Yes.
Diana, is how is the attitude of the NYPD improving, considering
Damn well better,
transgendered
because, you
people?
know, again, with the internet, we can always tell the world that they're, it is and it's not. They are, it depends, frankly, on what kind of trans person we're talking about. Are we talking about people of color who are sex workers in the street? No, the attitude is not improving among the police, because they feel free to abuse people like that, because, you know, in our society, money talks, and anyone who is, you know, economically marginalized is mute. Do they annoy trans folk who are not, you know, street walkers or sex workers, or, you know, who might not be? There is a lot of class and race prejudice involved in the police abuse of trans folk, of all folk, and that's something we're trying to fix. We make it clear that, you know, you, officer, you can abuse the lady on the corner who's trying to make a living, and that's fine, but I'm watching you abuse her, and I go on TV and tell everyone that you've abused her. So don't abuse her. You know, I mean, there's a certain level of accountability, and we have to increase that, but I think the police now know that no one operates in a vacuum, and that it's not a good idea to mess with people who are not alone in the world. What you were saying earlier, everyone needs someone. Well, trans folk tend to stick together, mainly because we're despised and marginalized and hated.
Right.
So if some trans lady has a problem, she comes to me, and I go on television and tell you about it. And then, you know.
Great.
And then whoever caused her that problem is accountable to
Diana,
you.
I want to say this has been the Josh Wolinski Show, and I didn't mention this to Diana, but this is going to be on YouTube. We're going to put this interview, this wonderful interview, which I've been enjoying very much, on YouTube, and this has only been part one.
Ooh.
So until next week, this has been the Josh Wolinski Show. Thank you
Bye.
for
See you
watching.
next
Bye.
time.